Welcome to The Creative Shift. My name is Dan Blank, author of the book Be the Gateway and founder of WeGrowMedia.com, where I work with writers and creators. Today, I want to share a case study. And this is a case study around getting book sales, audience growth, and even earning more money from someone's writing. And all of it has to do with an email newsletter. So today we are featuring work from Melinda Wenner Moyer. Now, she and I have worked together for more than 2 years now. And one of the things we've focused on a lot is the newsletter. So she is a science journalist and author. And when we started working together, we first started off with her book launch. And then we evolved and kept evolving through that. Pretty soon what we found is the newsletter was a really compelling way not just to share her message, but help her audience and actually grow her career. So years ago, I used to work at a big publishing company, and I remember every now and again executives talking about, or maybe reading in a business article, this idea of hockey stick growth. And basically what they meant was, imagine if you laid like a hockey stick down on the ground, and on the left, it's, low to the ground, and then there's this quick spike going upwards. And this is what a lot of people dreamed about in business, was this kind of rapid growth. What would get us rapid growth? Well, not long ago, I was looking at Melinda's email newsletter statistics, and what I saw was that hockey stick, where it started out, growing, a nice steady clip, and then more, and then more, and then more and more and more. So when she started the newsletter with Substack back in December of 2020, she started out like we all start out, with 0 and then with a few dozen and with a few hundred, because she was, sharing that with her network. Then in the last couple years, what you find is now she is more in the 14,000 subscriber range. And what's neat when you look at the data is you see the little spikes of how she kind of got there. And what I find is this pace is increasing, where she is picking up more subscribers now, like this month, than she would have, even relatively speaking, a year ago or 6 months ago. So I am a fan of newsletters. I've sent out a weekly email newsletter every week for more than 16, 17 years, something like that, which you can find at WeGrowMedia.com/newsletter. And if you're a writer or creator, you might be hearing this saying, oh, don't talk about newsletters. I don't want a newsletter. But Melinda sent out a tweet back in February that said this: my publisher has essentially said that they credit my Substack, my newsletter, for my continued book sales. My book came out in 2021. And as she's doubled down on this, her newsletter, her social media showing up, what we find is it's a very, very compelling way for her to expand her audience and engage her existing audience. So this might surprise some of you, because I talk to a lot of writers and creators, and I talk about newsletters, and, originally they'll often say things like, I don't like email, and nobody does. Nobody I know does. Maybe get past that, and we, say, well, here's why it could be compelling. They'll say, fine, maybe I'll do a quarterly or maybe monthly newsletter. And I'm like, well, let's start at monthly and talk about that. I'm a big fan of weekly. So Melinda sends out 3 emails a week, which I think is surprising to a lot of people. She sends out one newsletter to her free list, those 13 or 14,000 subscribers that she has now. She sends out another newsletter to her paid subscribers, which we will talk about in a moment. And then another email goes out as an interactive thread to those paid subscribers as well. And I think this is a big point, which is so many writers and creators worry about bugging their audience. I don't want to bug them. And I certainly don't want to bug the people who are paying me. And I want you to think about just flipping this perspective, to consider that the people who are paying you might want to hear from you. Even the people who aren't paying you might want to hear from you. What I like about newsletters is that people have that unsubscribe button. What I like about it is it's an opt-in thing. They can choose to subscribe or unsubscribe at any time. And maybe they will resubscribe. I will follow or unfollow people again and again and again over my lifetime. And I like having that ability to do that because maybe I'm too distracted or too busy or something like that. So she started the paid version of her newsletter about a year and a half back. And if we think of the most compelling metric to share here, she now earns, on average, if you kind of spec this out for the next year, $40,000 a year or within the next year just on her paid email newsletter subscribers. That is staggering. Not because she doesn't deserve it. Obviously she does. It's because she's earning this from her writing and which is amazing and wonderful and great. And because she's doing it through a newsletter where, again, a lot of people think, I don't want to do a newsletter. Newsletters don't work. Nobody likes newsletters. And yet here she is earning a significant chunk of revenue from just her paid newsletter subscribers. And her paid subscribers are a subset of that. It's not the 14 or 13,000 people. It is a much smaller percentage of that. It's in the hundreds. And this is something I just am always in awe of and so fascinated by. A few weeks back on my blog at wegrowmedia.com, I wrote a post that talked about this advice that my friend Jenny Nash and I always kind of repeat back and forth to each other, which is, we don't know what works, but we know that doing stuff works. A whole piece about that. And this is something I think a lot about with the incredible success that Melinda has had. That there are so many ideas that have been brainstormed and strategies that we've created or she's created. Analyzing of opportunities and choices, testing ideas, finding the path that to her feels strategic to her goals, meaningful to her audience, but also authentic to who she is. It is a process to do that. And I think that often as an outside viewer, you don't see that. This idea that you can look as an outsider to what she has created or another writer has created, and it seems so obvious. But I can tell you that behind the scenes, it's not so obvious. There's so much strategy, so many conversations, so many ideas that come up, so many things that are tested or floated, things that will launch, things that won't launch, that all along the way, we are looking for those guideposts. And of course, we have data and we have good experience, we have strategy, all that stuff. But some of it also goes on gut, and some of it is a wait and see, and some of it feels like a big risk. An example of that is the branding of her newsletter. When she first launched this newsletter, I'm going to say a couple words. If there's children in the room, you might want to turn down the volume. But, her book is titled How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes. And it's done really well, selling tens of thousands of copies, I believe. And the newsletter is called Is My Kid the Asshole? And I believe that title came from like a Reddit thread of that topic, that sort of thing. And that title served her really well. But recently, she's been thinking about her next book and the branding in general and how to really keep serving more people. And she's wanted to change the title of that newsletter. So we have spent weeks and weeks, really months, brainstorming different titles for that. So she and I have gone back and forth doing that. She's gone back and forth with her wonderful network of friends and collaborators to test out ideas. I've done mock-ups of logos for her, as have other people, including professional designers, of which I'm not a professional designer. And, she settled on something. We created a rollout plan. And one, you would never see the behind the scenes of that. Once she rolls out that rebranding, you might think, oh, of course, what a great title. Maybe you won't think that. But you won't see all the weeks and months of planning and ideas and loving an idea, then rejecting the idea, that sort of thing. And even when it was going to roll out the other week and it was all set to go, And then she started getting a lot of publicity for her newsletter through a couple of great ways. And I texted her and said, you know what? You're getting a lot of new eyeballs on your stuff. Maybe this is not the week to rebrand, because what I'm worried about is people coming in at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday and getting one newsletter title. And then on 2 o'clock on that Tuesday, it's a different newsletter title. Or if they sign up because they read about you from somewhere and they give it one title, and then a week later they get your first newsletter and now it's a different title. It could cause a lot of confusion from people. And, there's so much going on. Why don't we wait till a quieter time period to do that? And she agreed, and she pulled the plug on that for the time being. And we are now biding our time to then figure out when is the right time to rebrand that. Of course, other stuff has come up in the meantime, which has delayed it. But when I think about what has brought this growth, so much of it is her incredible ability to forge meaningful connections with other writers and other creators. Some of this is the nature of her work. Because she's a journalist, she's always interviewing experts. But she really does so much to forge meaningful connections with colleagues, I would say. People she can reach out to, people she is celebrating and featuring. And I find that people then return that favor to her. One, because they like her writing, they like her analysis. But also, I imagine it's because they respect her and her work, and they want to kind of return that favor in some way, not as a one-to-one, but because they're a part of each other's lives at this point. And some of this is infused with the idea of her next book. And, this is something I've been in conversations with her about for a while. And again, it's one of these things where I think eventually when she says, hey, I'm going to be releasing another book and this is the topic, it will seem obvious to people. But I can tell you in the back end, it doesn't feel that obvious, because there are ideas that come out there and they're developed and then they're changed, and then she'll talk to, collaborators, professional collaborators, and they'll have feedback and they'll still all these different directions. It's a process for her to figure out what the right thing to do is, what she wants to do. It is that process. I love being able to work with writers on this time frame to kind of see this, because it's amazing to see the behind the scenes, but also the growth. And Melinda's career is her own. The way that she approaches it is unique to her. Her goals, something we've talked a lot about, it's so unique to her. It doesn't apply one-to-one to any other writer in some ways. But this process is a deep one, and she's been very generous about including me in that process and also reflecting on that in some ways. She's been really generous talking about this idea of it's a process of really figuring out herself. It's not just, how do I brand this thing? To me, this process is so much about how you craft that identity and that career. And all of it's built on, a process I've been honing for years. I talk a lot about the creative success pyramid, which is the way that I explain the process I go through with writers, where there are these multi-steps that you go from the bottom of the pyramid, the foundation, up to the top. You can find that at wegrowmedia.com. I try to share a lot of information on that. But if you are on this journey, I want to encourage you to keep going. If you're looking for a partner in that process, definitely check out the Work With Me page on my site, wegrowmedia.com. And this is the work I love doing, is working in the trenches with writers and creators. It is so inspiring to me to see what Melinda has accomplished and the way she's done it. Anyhow, if you have any feedback, questions, or comments, you can reach me anytime, dan@wegrowmedia.com. You can find me at wegrowmedia.com or on social media at Dan Blank. Thank you so much for listening until the end.